We'll call the work session to order, and I'll turn it over to Ron Whitlatch.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, City Council. So we have tonight for you, I'm sure it'll be a thrilling and lovely time to talk about transportation SDCs. Over the course of the last year and a half, we've been working with a committee that's included 2 city councilors, Councilor Grizzle, and a couple of community members, contractor Bob Armstrong, Brian Vendetta, and then Don Robertson, representative realtor industry, to update the methodology for our transportation system plan. Is it not on? Is it on now?
Now it's on.
Now it's on. Okay, so now it's on.
That's better.
Anyway, we've gone through that process. This was based off of the new transportation system plan that was done in 2018. Our current update was done in 2007. That's what we're currently using is 2007 methodology and 2007 project list. So with this tonight, we've got Deb Ghilardi from the Ghilardi-Rothstein Group. Deb's an expert in SDCs, and she walked us through this and has done all the labor-intensive stuff to get us to the point where we're at tonight. And that's kind of where I'll leave it. I'll let Deb take it from there. She's got a PowerPoint. Basically, at the end of this is to let you guys ask questions. There's a pretty substantial increase that we're looking at in transportation SDCs. And we can go through that as we're going through the PowerPoint that she's got for you tonight. And so with that, I will turn it over to Deb.
Okay, let's do a check real quick here. You can hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. So far, so good. And in terms of the slides, are you seeing just the one slide, or are you seeing the next slide too?
Looks like that and the next slide.
Okay, let me try to all right, let's try to change the display swap. How about that?
That's good. Perfect.
Is that better?
Yes.
Perfect.
Okay, great. All right, we'll dive in then. So as Ron said, we updated the methodology based on the most recent transportation system plan. So let me first make sure everybody's grounded in some of the basics of the SDC calculation, the methodology framework. For all the systems, the basic methodology is the same. We take the growth costs and we divide the costs over the units, projected units of growth over whatever the planning period is, and we get a cost per unit. Now, obviously, the type of units is different if we're talking about transportation or parks or water, etc. We're talking about transportation, so units are measured in terms of trips, vehicle trips. And so we determine the transportation specific costs associated with growth. We divide that total cost over the projected growth in trips, also from the system plan, and that gives us an updated cost per trip. From there, so that's one part of the methodology, and then the other part of the methodology is how we then are going to charge individual developments for their SDCs based on the type of development. So we'll talk about both of those components. And of course, the devil's always in the details. So when I say, oh, we determine the growth costs, there's a lot of work that goes into that. And the Oregon statutes give us some guidelines about some of the considerations. So one thing to understand is that we can include both future improvement costs, that's called the improvement fee in the SDCs, and we can include the costs associated with existing facility available capacity. That's called the reimbursement fee. And with respect to the improvement fee, we can only include costs that are associated with providing new capacity, and that capacity has to be specifically for growth. So the statutes speak to, well, what is considered an increase in capacity? Obviously, it can be new facilities that you're adding, but we can also include costs associated with enhancing the level of performance of existing facilities. So think widening a street, realignments in some cases, things like that. For the reimbursement fee, the criteria is that the facility has to have available capacity and that, to be utilized by future growth, and that had to be paid for by city funds. We've, for the purposes of this methodology, based the existing system facility costs on 2020 dollars. So it's based on current, it reflects current value, and made adjustments for contributions, both for existing facilities and projected future. In terms of the improvement fee and determining that SDC eligibility basis for each individual project, Ron and I went through in detail the projects, as did your transportation system plan consultant, DKS. They looked at each individual project and determined where projects, different mobility criteria, and whether there were existing deficiencies, and lots of the nitty-gritty details with respect to the transportation system plan. So with respect to new facilities, some examples are intersection improvements where, adding signalization or other types of facilities that might not be there currently, or extending roadways, new roadways, those sorts of things, new paths. Those projects are 100% SDC eligible if the addition of, say, an intersection improvement is not needed because of a current deficiency with respect to meeting a level of service target. And then for performance improvements, these are, as I mentioned, kind of things that are done to existing facilities to improve the performance with respect, that can be realignment for safety, other things, but also that provides additional capacity because you can get more vehicles, or, we're looking at all modes, maybe bike, pedestrian, traffic as well, through an intersection, or improve, segments within the system. In those cases, we generally, where there's something that's enhancing the level of performance of a facility, it's generally a shared allocation between future growth, because future growth will definitely benefit, but there's also often a benefit to existing development. So in those cases, we prorate those in terms of the contribution of the future trips that the travel demand model has estimated. Then with respect to other modes, so bike and pedestrian, we look at, it's similar to how we evaluate parks SDCs, where we consider that existing development has paid for what's available today in terms of miles and shared use paths, and that the next increment should first be met by future growth through SDCs, unless there's, again, an increase in the level of service that we're providing. So if we're providing more miles per capita of bike pedestrian facilities, then existing development would pay a share of that. In your case, you're basically keeping pace with additional development. So most of the new capacity and bike and pedestrian facilities comes from future growth. This is a summary of the project list. There's lots of projects, and the methodology report in the appendix has a very detailed list of all of those projects. This just gives you a snapshot of the a summary based on the type of project. So all the motor vehicle projects, bike ped, SUP is shared use path. And you can see the total cost that's been estimated, other funding that's estimated to be applied, available for those projects. The net, the difference between the total and the other funding is the city cost. And then you have the growth share. As I mentioned, we looked at each individual project, and each individual project has its own growth allocation, but this just shows you for the class of projects as a whole, like motor vehicle, 79% of those costs were estimated to be related to meeting new capacity needs for growth. And that represents about just over half of the cost basis for the SDCs. Bike and pedestrian, again, most of that is SDC eligible because you are providing additional miles to meet the growth needs to maintain the level of service that you're providing today. Transit's based on population. Demand management is a very limited portion because it can only be capacity related capital costs. So a small component of the overall SDC, 1%. Oh, and just to mention, we started out with looking at just package 1 from the TSP in terms of the project list, but there are a number of projects that were in other packages where they are expected to be built sooner rather than later. So those are also included. So there were some refinements to just the priority, and again, reflects what the city expects to be needed within the planning window. So back to the basic SDC equation, the total cost when we include the $26.3 million from the project list, in addition to $5 million in existing facility costs, the total is just over 31 million, but that gets spread out over 20 years of growth, and the growth trips are estimated in terms of the PM peak hour, because that's when capacity is evaluated for most of the system. So that cost divided by the growth in trips generates an SDC base unit cost of $6,235 per trip. Then we determine how to assess that cost per trip to different developments based on their estimated trips. And with the standard in the industry is to estimate trips for different development types based on the Travel Demand Institute for Transportation Engineers Trip Generation Manual that is comprised of studies from all over the country that estimate, the average trip generation of a grocery store versus a retail store versus a single family house. So that is typically the basis for how the base trip rate is determined. And then, and those are scaled based generally on the size. If you're a non-residential, most often it's based on the square footage of the building. So your individual trip rate or estimated trips will reflect the type of land use and your trip rate for some variable, the size based either number of dwelling units, if it's residential, size of the building, if it's non-residential, and then any adjustments. So for most or for a lot of commercial establishments, there is part of the trips that are generated by that use are trips that are already on the road and somebody what is called pass-by adjustments. If I'm passing by the grocery store on my way to work, stop in, get groceries, we don't count that as a trip. There's a discount for the grocery store because it wasn't a new trip that was generated by that use. And so this applies a lot to like donut shop, gas stations as well. So those adjustments are made. Also, all of that's factored into the SDC schedule for different development types. If that wasn't complicated enough, we also look at the size of the home for assessing residential SDCs. And actually, Lebanon was one of the first cities to develop a scaled SDC for residential developments to encourage or give benefit to smaller homes, because smaller homes tend to have fewer occupants and have less impact on the system because of fewer trips. The committee spent quite a lot of time considering different options, and we did some up-to-date analysis to look at how we might modify the current structure. One thing about the current structure is that it's a discounting mechanism only. So we've got the base SDC for a residential home. This sliding scale slopes down from 100% down to 30% of the SDC to down to 800 square feet of household size. What it doesn't do is sort of counterbalance that with a higher SDC for homes that are larger. And so we looked at and developed a couple of different options to assess the SDCs based on a tiering structure, which is becoming much more common in Oregon and around the country. And so here we looked at actual households from survey information, the Oregon Household Activity Survey. It has information on trip rates for particular addresses, and we can match that up with Lynn County Assessor's Office data. So this is very local also, and we can determine for different that relationship between the house size and the trips generated. And from that, we came up with a 3-tiered structure that, as I said, the committee considered different options, and this was the one that they recommended. And you can see that this EDU is an equivalent dwelling unit factor. So the typical house size, 1,450 square feet to up to almost 2,400 square feet of living space, would be assessed 1 EDU, so that base SDC, but there would be a discount for tier 1 under 1,450. So now more households would be eligible for a discount, but that discount is also been calibrated to actual trip generation results. So the discount isn't as deep as the current, but it also reflects in reality what the trip generation from smaller homes that was provided in the sample that we were able to evaluate. Then offsetting that is on the larger side, homes over 2,350 square feet would be charged an additional charge reflecting that they generate more trips on average. And you can see that most of the permits that have been issued based on the data we were able to evaluate, 73% fall within tier 2, which is what you would expect. But that potentially 15% of permits would be eligible for the discount. and 12% would be subject to the higher charge. And by increasing the threshold for the discount to $14.50, you pick up actually many more SDCs that would be assessed on this in this discounted tier compared to what you do today. So that was one of the things, as I mentioned, that the committee spent quite a bit of time on. Another consideration that the committee weighed in on was whether or not to phase in the increase in the SDC, because it is a sizable increase since you haven't modified the SDCs in quite a while. And the committee did recommend a 2-year phase-in, and that would be done not basically, exactly equally weighted, that in year 1, you would adopt 100% of the SDCR, which is the reimbursement component of the SDC, plus half of the increase to the improvement component. And then the second year, the full trip rate would go into effect. The part of the rationale there is that you have much greater flexibility on how you spend reimbursement SDC revenue, and it's a very important funding source for capital improvement projects for the city. So that was part of why that recommendation to do it in that way. Inflation, yeah.
Excuse me. Do you have a number for what it is currently? You got like what it is proposed for year 1. What is it currently for like a single family?
I'm actually going to show you that on the next slide, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, it's I think that the trip rate is right around 1,900 per trip. So, going to 6235 is a significant increase. But I'll show you specifically for single family in a second here. So what that would mean in terms of the tiers here, you can see ultimately in year 2 going to 6173, because a single family home typically is estimated to generate 0.99 trips during the PM peak hour. And so we multiply the 0.99 times the 6235. That's how we get 6,173. And then we've got the discount factors or the surcharge in the case of the tier 3. So you would have a range of SDCs from 4651 up to 7545. This shows you visually this where you are today with respect to the residential SDCs and for a typical dwelling unit and what the updated number would be. So you can see you're very low on the scale. And let me see, I think on this one, I've got the actual number. Yeah, so it's 1984, 1,984 for a dwelling unit. And we'll go back to that table in a second. But that puts you at the very, low end of this. And this is a broader comparison. This is not just specific to the area. The updated puts you pretty much right in the middle. And that is just considering the transportation SDC. Now, this comparison is a little bit dated now. It's 2019, so most cities will increase their SDCs every year with inflation at least, and if there's a methodology update, it can be higher. So these have probably, at least for some of the communities, if not all, have increased since 2019. This table here provides you a little closer geographically comparison and incorporates all of the SDCs, because when a developer pays an SDC, they're not so much considered just about transportation. They want to know what the total impact is going to be. So this gives you a sense of that. And again, where you are currently with the 1,984 for streets and a total of about 12,700. And then if you were to adopt this all at once, that would take you to close to 17,000. And which, you know, within this group, Millersburg just did a recent update and increased their SDCs pretty significantly. It would put you, you know, right around where they are. Corvallis higher, Salem's higher. Sweet Home is phasing in their SDCs, and Albany has elected not to charge 100% of their maximum allowable. So there's a lot of policy decisions that play into what these SDCs are for other cities. Final slide, and then I'll be happy to answer questions. Next steps is following the SDC statutory requirements. We posted the methodology, made it available for public review 60 days prior to the public hearing, which is scheduled for September 8th. And there was a notification 90 days prior to that hearing. As I mentioned, you are once you adopt a new methodology, you can make changes to the rates, to those actual charges based on inflation every year. You can also make changes based on changes to your project list. And there are requirements if you're going to add a project and you want to increase the SDCs, then you have to follow some notification requirements, but you can at least keep the fees current with inflation and current with as your project list changes and adapts to current conditions. Okay, with that, that was all I had in terms of slides.
Guys got any questions in terms of that and where we're at? I'll give you a little background on
Your
how we
mic
came
on.
up with the project list. So in the transportation system plan,
Did you turn your mic off?
it's on.
Oh, okay. Doesn't sound that way.
Does it sound like it's on now? It's just got to
Be
be
closer.
close to me. Okay. We took projects that we thought were going to happen sooner, like some of the transportation system plan capital piece of it is phased into 3 different phases. So your priority 1s, 2, and 3, and some of the stuff that's in 3 and some of the stuff that's in 2, we've actually had developers looking at right now. So we took our best guess at that. That's not to say that we can't go back and reshape the project list to, you know, maybe you pull a project off that doesn't look like it's going to happen and you can keep your SDC charge the same without having to, it's just got to be very similar in nature without having to go back through a methodology update. So that's kind of how we came up with the project list, and that's kind of included in all this. That's the packet that was given. And as Deb said, we did do all the notice. We've noticed, oh gosh, I can't remember everybody, but Lynn County Housing, several other contracting agencies around, and we've heard no comment back on it. So with that, we're open for questions. It's a big jump. And our intent would be to come back with storm drainage as soon as the storm drain master plan is done. We'll go through this process again and update these and base it on new projects. And, you know, it's likely going to increase again. So that's something to think about as we move through this, that this is a big increase in transportation. But there will also be, you know, as the drainage master plan gets done and as the wastewater master plan gets done, those elements will also be factored into your overall SDC. So,
Been looking at the numbers, it looks like that will bring us kind of in that middle of the pack with the other cities. So
for transportation, yes. And there's things that we can do. I mean, we do not have to charge our whole SDC. If we got to a point where the methodology vetted out that, you know, all of our SDCs combined were, you know, some astronomical price, we could scale that back. We could scale the project list back on what we think is going to happen in maybe a narrower planning window rather than looking at, you know, 20 years out and doing it that way. So there's options out there, but I'm just kind of forewarning, it will increase the methodology on all these. But that'll be over the course of the next 2-3 years.
What's the time frame for those?
Well, I mean, if you think about how long, yeah, so we're wrapping up the drainage master plan. So by the time we get to, doing the SDC plan with that, so that's one facility. We would like to do parks, but we need to update the parks master plan so that we're capturing the projects that are current. I mean, we could always go and update the SDCs for all of these, but it's kind of better to do it, in my opinion, as you're updating the master plans. That way you're actually capturing the projects that you're going to do or that you have planned to do.
Ron, do we know those communities that are higher than us, what kind of impact they've had on growth of, growth from construction of residential, multi-density apartments and those kind of things?
I don't. Deb, do you have a feel for that?
Well, I'll just say that, if you look at many of these communities on the upper end, they are booming with new development, which is, a lot of them are newly developing areas. So infrastructure is more expensive and there's a very high demand. And so in cases where there's, I'd say, what the other trend has been to not to recover the full required costs from the base of development. But if there are affordable housing type developments that are want to be encouraged, that those are dealt with on a different targeted basis where you have incentives built into your ordinance policy that allows for either forgiving the SDCs entirely or some level of discounting. So I'd say, what's driving, there is obviously always concern about the impacts of the cost of building housing and buying housing. But the SDCs, are paying for the infrastructure needed also to allow for that development to occur. So it's a balancing act. And but yeah, I'd say that in most of the areas, the providing those incentives for affordable housing is the way people are balancing the need for that type of housing in particular.
I have a question. I'm not sure if this is maybe Deb or you, Ron. It's odd to me that Albany is so significantly lower. And because they're choosing, as you said, Deb, less than 100% of what they're eligible. Does anybody know what the conversation was like? Why they did that?
I don't.
I mean, I can answer I helped them with the transportation SDCs, and there just wasn't the political will to increase the SDCs to the level that the transportation project list would have allowed for. And so there was a series of both, limiting the projects on that list, but also just taking only some percentage of that. And that's how those SDCs were reduced. We more recently updated their wastewater SDCs. And again, the council just decided they weren't going to charge the maximum allowable. And so they did increase it some, but I think that's just one of those things that each jurisdiction has to weigh the pluses and the minuses associated with that because of the need to provide the funding through some other mechanism.
But
if not
growth will
SDCs.
be paid for by existing people or by the new people coming in. So they've just decided that existing residents will pay for some of subsidized growth.
Or
in
projects
those
get delayed,
departments.
right? Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
ahead.
Deb, can you pull back up that, the slide that had the local areas,
This one?
total SDCs up? I can't see it. I'm sorry. And I had a question for Ron once it's up.
Have to reshare it, Deb.
Oh, sorry. Let's see. Oh, okay. I didn't realize I was not sharing anymore. Let me, second here, share. Go back through our process here. Let's see if I can remember how let's see. So what are you seeing now?
The cover slide. Slide one.
Okay. Let me,
And my apologies for making this complicated.
no.
Oh, perfect. Oh,
Oops. Here, now you can see?
okay. Yes, thank you.
Yep.
So, Ron, that's the current for storm, right? 241. Oh, no. Yeah, that's the current one. And that's the one that we're also looking at in tandem of going up. Am I correct? Or separately in another process?
Yeah, it'd be separately in another process as soon as the master plan's done. Yeah, so we would do the same thing with that. A lot of it depends on how many projects you take out of that. So
Mhm.
we're kind of looking at it, and I think we were fairly conservative and in the projects we picked for transportation. We picked projects that we think are very likely to happen. We didn't just pick all the projects, or you can imagine the dollar figure that would be involved with that. I think the same thing will happen with storm drainage.
Mhm. With storm drainage, though, are there not projects that we have to take on due to state regulation where we can't avoid some of those projects, is, I think, or is kind of part
Yeah,
of the
there
question.
will be. I mean, this will be mostly for growth, right? So, but
Right.
there will be a reimbursement piece to it. So that will help with projects that, where we have to, let's say, build a new outfall for one of our pipe systems. We could use that, the R piece for that. The I section of that is going to be used for growth. It's going to be used for new stuff. Maybe not so much in terms of regulatory piece. This is more in terms of the growth piece. The regulatory side wouldn't really play into that too much.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. I just wanted to get an
Sure.
idea of what if that number was going to shoot up because of maybe increased regulation or anything along those lines. But if it's really just the growth piece, right?
It's going to be the
SDC
new
piece.
projects.
Got
Yeah.
it.
And so when we go through that committee again, and maybe that would be helpful, is to go through the transportation or the storm drainage master plan when we do that. And we can kind of really dig in with the committee and look at what projects in the 20-year planning horizon are going to, and we'll probably get it all wrong. We'll probably miss them all, I mean, but we'll try. So,
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions?
And what percentage is the school districts getting through SDC charges?
well, theirs isn't an SDC, it's a,
Something
It's a
different.
construction
yes,
excise
yeah,
tax.
construction excise, and I don't know what that percentage, Kelly, do you know? Okay.
So for the listening audience, Kelly cited a dollar and some change per square foot of new construction is a construction excise tax that goes to the school district that we collect for them.
But it's not part of our city fund. It's part
It
of
is
the
not
school
part of
district.
our city fund. It is a pass-through.
Okay.
Okay.
No other questions?
Thank you,
Deb.
Deb.
Appreciate your presentation and all the details.
You are welcome.
Did you have anything else, Ron?
Nope, that's good.
Okay.
Thanks, Deb.
All right. Thank you.
Good night all.
With that, we will adjourn the work session.